The rain had started early that morning in Charleston, fine needles of cold mist brushing against the windows of the Moore residence. The old southern house stood proudly at the edge of the marsh, its white columns wrapped with orange garlands and a banner that read Thanksgiving Family Gathering. Inside, the long mahogany table gleamed under the chandelier, heavy with roasted turkey cornbread stuffing and crystal glasses of red wine. The faint sound of cutlery and polite conversation filled the air like a delicate rhythm that did not quite reach warmth. I had not been home in 5 years. I told myself this. Thanksgiving would be different, that time might have softened my father's temper, and that my success might have earned his respect. I was wrong. My name is Elena Moore. I am 33 years old, an aerospace engineer, and the founder of SkyAid Systems, a company that designs drones for search and rescue operations. Last month, one of my prototypes had helped locate 4 missing workers after the Charleston flood. I thought it would make him proud. I thought wrong. As I stepped into the dining room, all conversation stopped for half a second. My father, Richard Moore, former Army colonel and lifetime believer in authority, looked up from carving the turkey. His gray hair was cut to regulation length, and his voice still carried the bark of command. "Well," he said, "look who finally decided to come back to the family she abandoned." "I didn't abandon anyone," I said softly. "I built something." He frowned as if the word build belonged only to men. My mother, Margaret, lowered her eyes to the table. My younger brother, Luke, offered a half smile that felt more like pity than welcome. "I brought something for you, Dad," I said, pulling a small case from my bag. Inside was the 3D printed model of the drone that had saved those 4 men. "It's what I've been working on." The design just won the National Engineering Award. He gave a short laugh, the kind that cuts instead of amuses. "A toy," he said. "That's what you've spent your life on. Toys for the government." "It's not a toy," I replied. My voice trembled just enough to reveal that I still wanted him to see me. "It can carry medical supplies across flooded zones. It saved lives." The room went still. The only sound was the soft ticking of the grandfather clock behind him. He set down the carving knife and leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "You always had to prove you were better than everyone else, didn't you, Elena? You couldn't just sit down and behave like a lady. You had to challenge me, just like your mother does when she forgets her place." "Richard," my mother whispered. "Please," he ignored her. "Men build, men protect, women follow. That's how this house was built." Something inside me cracked, not from anger, but exhaustion. "Then maybe that's why your house keeps falling apart," I said. The silence that followed was louder than any shout. His face darkened, the vein at his temple pulsing. He rose from his chair slowly, the way soldiers rise before delivering punishment. "Watch your tone," he warned. I met his gaze. "No, you watch your hands." The slap came fast and sharp. The crack of skin on skin echoed against the chandelier glass. The wine glasses trembled. 14 relatives froze mid-breath. A drop of red wine spilled onto the white tablecloth, spreading like a wound. My cheek burned, but it was the silence that stung worse. He leaned close enough for me to smell the bourbon in his breath. "There's only room for men at this table." For a moment I thought my mother would stand, but she stayed seated, hands gripping her napkin. My brother's eyes darted away. Every person at that table chose comfort over courage. I straightened my face, hot with humiliation, but my voice steady. "Then I'll build my own." He blinked, not expecting defiance. "What did you say? I said I'll build my own table." The words were calm, but they carried the weight of every year I had stayed silent. I turned to leave, but his hand grabbed my arm. Before I could react, he pushed me toward the door, the force so sudden my heel slipped against the polished floor. My shoulder hit the doorframe. The crystal glass he had been holding shattered against the wood. "Get out!" he shouted, his voice shaking with rage. "If you're so independent, prove it. Go live with your machines." The door flew open and the cold rain rushed in. He shoved me once more and I stumbled onto the porch. The sound of the door slamming shut echoed through the yard. For a moment, I just stood there in the rain, feeling the sting of the slap, the weight of 1,000 unspoken words pressing against my chest. Through the window, I could still see them sitting there motionless, their forks suspended midair as if the world had paused. My mother dabbed her eyes but did not come after me. Luke whispered something I could not hear. The red wine on my white blouse had turned into a bruise-shaped stain spreading across the fabric like proof. The rain mixed with it, washing it down in thin streaks of crimson. I took one last look at the house that had never been a home. The porch light flickered in the storm. Behind that door sat a man who believed control was love and silence was peace. As I walked down the gravel driveway toward my car, my heart was strangely calm. Every step felt like the beginning of something that had been waiting to rise for years. When I reached the car, I opened the trunk, placed the drone model inside, and closed it gently. The rain fell harder, drumming against the roof like applause from an unseen audience. I looked up at the dark sky and whispered to no one. One day you'll see what a woman can build. The engine started with a quiet hum. As I drove away, the house disappeared behind the curtain of rain, but the echo of his words remained. There's only room for men at this table. And my answer stayed with me firm and unbroken. Then I'll build my own. That was the moment the war inside my house ended, and the one inside me began. The rain followed me down the empty Charleston highway, a steady rhythm against the windshield, like fingers tapping on glass to remind me I was still alive. The wipers swept back and forth, erasing the past for half a second at a time. But it always came back. The slap, the silence, the look on my mother's face. I drove aimlessly until the glow of a gas station sign cut through the fog. I pulled over, turned off the engine, and sat in the stillness, listening to my heartbeat echo in the small cabin. My cheek still throbbed. The imprint of his hand had faded, but the heat lingered. I stepped out of the car, the rain soaking through my jacket instantly. Inside the gas station, fluorescent lights hummed above racks of chips and coffee cups. I grabbed a paper towel, wet it under the sink, and pressed it to my lip. A faint smear of blood came away. In the mirror above the sink, I saw my reflection, eyes wide hair plastered to my face, the mark of a daughter who had been taught to obey. My phone buzzed on the counter, a text from Mom. He didn't mean it. Another followed from Luke. You always provoke him, just let it go. I stared at the words until they blurred. Then I deleted both messages. Silence again. I had lived in that silence my entire life. My father's house was a place where noise was punished and compliance rewarded. The walls still carried the echoes of his commands. Even as a child, I knew when to stop breathing loudly. The only place I ever felt free was under the night sky, lying on the roof, tracing constellations through my bedroom window, dreaming of things that could fly away. My father never liked that either. Girls don't climb roofs, he'd said once. They stay on the ground and wait to be chosen. I was 15 when I stopped waiting. Luke had broken his radio, and I spent the afternoon fixing it. When my father came home, he didn't see pride on my face, he saw rebellion. He made me kneel on the porch in the summer heat until my knees burned against the wood. You'll learn your place, he'd said, his shadow long and dark over me. My mother had watched from the window, one hand pressed to her mouth, the other holding a dish towel. She didn't say a word. She never did. That was the lesson of our house silence, was survival. My father believed he was building strength, but what he built was fear. That night after the punishment, my grandfather Henry Moore came to see me. He was already frail, then his hands trembling from old war injuries, but his eyes were clear. He crouched beside me, handed me a cup of water, and said softly, "The only war worth fighting is the one inside your house." I hadn't understood then, but I do now. He wasn't talking about family conflict. He meant the battle between who you are told to be and who you really are. I tossed the bloodied towel into the trash and stepped back into the rain. The cold hit like truth. My car smelled faintly of wet leather and burnt coffee. I turned the heater on, wiped the fog from the windshield, and stared at my own reflection in the glass. Somewhere behind me, that house still stood lights glowing like a command post. Inside it sat a man who thought power was love, a woman who mistook fear for devotion, and a son who learned that cruelty was masculinity. And then there was me, the unwanted daughter, the failure, the one who never learned to sit still, the one who built machines instead of excuses. I started the car, pulled onto the road, and let the city swallow me. Downtown Charleston shimmered in puddles, neon lights bending in the water like broken mirrors. My phone vibrated again, but I ignored it. I didn't need more apologies from people who weren't sorry. I turned on the radio. A talk show host was discussing gratitude reading messages from callers about family reunions and forgiveness. I turned it off. Gratitude was a luxury for people who were safe. I drove until the streets narrowed into the familiar district where my apartment tower rose over the harbor. The Penthouse was my sanctuary, a space of glass and light overlooking the Atlantic. It was silent, but not the kind of silence that suffocates. It was the kind that listens. I poured myself a cup of black coffee and stood by the window. Rain streaked the glass in long silver lines. Across the harbor, lightning flashed over Fort Sumter. The sound came seconds later, rolling low and deep like an old memory waking up. I pressed a hand to my cheek. The sting had faded, but something deeper remained, a pulse of grief and fury that would not die. My mind wandered back to my father's words, the way he said them like gospel. "There's only room for men at this table." The words clanged in my chest, each syllable a nail in the coffin of who he wanted me to be. I thought about the countless daughters sitting at similar tables across the country, biting their tongues, pretending not to feel small. The thought made my throat tighten. I opened my laptop. The glow of the screen painted the room in blue light. The cursor blinked on a blank document. Without thinking, I typed Operation Table. I didn't know what it would be yet, only that it would be something I built myself, something that could not be taken away. Outside, the rain slowed to a drizzle. I could see the faint reflection of the old city lights in the harbor, the ghost of the place I came from. Somewhere out there, my father would be finishing his dinner believing he had won. But for the first time in my life, I didn't feel defeated. I felt awake. I raised the cup of coffee to my lips and whispered into the quiet. The war inside my house is over. Now it's my turn. The storm had passed, but inside me something far stronger had begun to rise. Morning crept into the penthouse through a thin veil of fog. The rain had stopped, but the sky still looked heavy, a muted gray that pressed against the windows. I woke on the couch, my jacket still damp from the night before, my phone face down on the table. The silence was complete except for the low hum of the city below. For a moment, I didn't move. My body ached as if the slap had left marks deeper than skin. When I finally stood, I caught sight of my reflection in the glass wall eyes, swollen hair, tangled a faint bruise on my cheekbone. Then I noticed the blouse draped over the chair. The red wine stain had dried into the fabric, a dark maroon bloom spreading like a wound. I picked it up and stared at it under the morning light. It wasn't just wine. It was everything that family dinners had meant to me. Rituals of obedience, quiet shame, and the pretense of unity. Every year, I had worn white to that table, hoping to be seen as pure as enough. And every year, I left with something spilled on me that could not be washed away. I hung the blouse on the back of a chair, the stain facing outward, and decided not to clean it. It would stay there, a reminder. A flag of war. I made coffee and sat on the floor laptop, open the blue glow cutting through the gray morning. The cursor blinked under the words I had typed last night, Operation Table. I stared at it for a long time before typing again. If they believed I didn't deserve a seat, I would build my own, but not for revenge, for visibility, for every woman who had been told she was too much or not enough. The idea began to take shape. A rooftop dinner, open to anyone spending Thanksgiving alone. YTAs working the night shift, rideshare drivers, women from shelters, veterans without families. A table for those who had been pushed away from their own. The penthouse rooftop wasn't large, but it had enough space for 60 people. The logistics part of my brain kicked in, the engineer inside me waking like a machine, long idle. I opened the city permit portal. The event would need classification as humanitarian outreach, which could bypass the HOA restrictions if documented properly. I reached out to an old contact from my time at the city safety department, a pragmatic administrator named Denise, who once told me, "If you want things done, use the right language." My email was concise: community dinner for displaced and essential workers. Nonprofit format, safety compliant. She replied within an hour. "If you send your safety plan, I can mark it under emergency relief. That gives you clearance under Code 14B. Code 14B, the clause designed for relief zones after storms. It felt poetic. Last night had been its own kind of disaster. I spent the next few hours drafting the safety documents, mapping seating layouts, calculating weight distribution for tables, wiring, and heating lamps. The work steadied my hands. Each line of code, each logistic detail felt like reclaiming breath. I called a rental service to request tables and chairs, only to have the representative hesitate when I mentioned the building. "Oh, you're at the Piermont. Their HOA's strict. They'll shut you down if they can." I smiled faintly. They can try. When the deliveries began, I supervised every piece that came through the freight elevator. Workers nodded politely but didn't ask questions. I liked it that way. Outside, the wind picked up and the sky threatened more rain, but the rooftop was transforming one plank, one string of lights at a time. Around noon, my neighbor from the 12th floor stopped by curious. "Thanksgiving party?" she asked. I hesitated before answering. "Something like that. For people who don't have anywhere to go." She smiled softly. "Then it's exactly what Thanksgiving should be." When she left, I stood there staring at the skyline. The city looked endless from up here, 1,000 windows holding 1,000 stories. Somewhere among them were others like me, people who had been told to stay silent, people who carried their bruises under sweaters and smiles. I wanted them to have light warmth, a seat that no one could take away. By evening, the rooftop glowed faintly in the fading light. The rented heaters cast halos of warmth across the deck. I placed candles in glass jars, one at every seat. The blouse with the red stain still hung inside by the window, visible from where I stood. It was both my shame and my badge. My phone buzzed with a new message. This time not from my family. It was from Denise Permit, approved classified under Code 14B, valid for 72 hours. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. For the first time in years, I felt something close to peace. But it didn't last long. An envelope slid under my door later that night, a formal letterhead from the Piermont Homeowners Association. "Cease and desist immediately. Large-scale gatherings violate Section 8.4. Fines up to $10,000. At the bottom, the HOA chairwoman, Judith Pierce, had signed her name with a flourish. I read it twice, then laughed quietly. The old version of me might have stopped there, but the woman staring at the red stain knew better. Fear was just another form of control, and I had lived under it too long. I placed the letter beside the blouse, both symbols of what needed to be burned out of my life. Then I returned to my laptop, adding one final line to my plan. If they think kindness is chaos, then let chaos be beautiful. I shut the lid, leaned back against the wall, and looked out over the city lights shimmering through the mist. The stain on the blouse caught the reflection of the streetlights, glowing faintly like a small red sun refusing to die. That night before I fell asleep, I promised myself I would never wash it. Some marks aren't meant to fade. They're meant to remind you of what silence costs, and of the moment you finally decide to speak. The next morning dawned colder, sharp wind, cutting through the harbor fog like glass. I woke before sunrise, unable to shake the restlessness that had been buzzing in my chest since the HOA letter arrived. The white envelope still sat on the counter beside the wine-stained blouse, both relics of the world that had tried to contain me. I poured black coffee into a chipped mug, the steam rising like smoke, and walked to the window overlooking the city. Charleston looked peaceful from up here, but I knew better. The Piermont building was a monument to wealth and control. Its residents liked their rules tidy, their neighbors invisible. I whispered to the skyline, "You're about to see what invisible can do." I opened my laptop and began mapping logistics. Step 1, confirm permit under Code 14B. Step 2, acquire equipment for 60 guests, tables, folding chairs, portable heaters, catering, warmers, safety lighting. Step 3, staff. The problem was manpower. I couldn't pay a full team without raising eyebrows. So I opened my volunteer network from SkyAid Systems, a platform I'd built for drone relief operations. There were always people willing to help for the right reason. I typed Thanksgiving rooftop dinner for essential workers and displaced individuals. Need volunteers with setup experience. Payment a seat at the table. Within an hour, the replies started rolling in. A firefighter named Carlos, a nurse named Emily, a rideshare driver Marcus who wrote, "Haven't had a Thanksgiving meal since my divorce. Count me in." I smiled as I replied to each one. These were the people my father would never have allowed near his perfect table, the working hands, the tired eyes, the ones who made cities breathe. They were the heart of what I was building. By mid-morning, deliveries began arriving at the loading dock. The building concierge frowned as the first truck backed up. "Ms. Moore, this looks like a large order." "Community dinner," I said casually. "All cleared with the city." He didn't argue, but I could tell he'd report it. "Fine, let them watch." Every movement felt like defiance, and it gave me energy. I supervised the workers carrying tables up through the freight elevator, directing them to place them in a long U-shape facing the skyline. The air was cold, but the heaters hummed to life one by one, glowing orange under their metal cages. I stood at the center of the deck, wind whipping my hair, and imagined it laughter echoing off the glass towers, music playing low, strangers sharing food instead of silence. That vision fueled me. Around noon, the first problem hit. 2 of the technicians I'd hired backed out after a call from someone in the HOA. One of them texted, "Sorry, Ms. Moore. They said they'll blacklist us from contracts. I can't risk it." I stared at the screen, my stomach tightening. For a moment, fear tried to creep back in, the same fear that had kept my mother quiet. Then I remembered Frank, the old veteran from downstairs who had helped me carry the tables last night. I grabbed my jacket and went down to his floor. The hallway smelled faintly of tobacco and dust. When he opened the door, he looked surprised but not displeased. "Morning, kid. You look like someone going into battle." "Maybe I am," I said. "I need help." He smiled, reaching for his coat. "About damn time someone asked." Together we returned to the rooftop. He moved slower than me, but there was purpose in every step. "They think kindness is chaos," he muttered, repeating my words from last night after I'd told him my plan. "They've forgotten that every army runs on it." The afternoon unfolded like a montage. Frank and I assembled tables, strung lights, tightened cables, tested outlets. When my hands went numb from cold, he handed me his gloves without asking. At one point, he stopped looking out across the city where the harbor met the gray Atlantic. "You know he said I fought a war I didn't believe in." This one I get. I didn't answer. My throat was tight. The sun began to set painting streaks of orange across the skyline. The heaters glowed brighter as the sky darkened. I could hear the faint hum of traffic below the city, unaware that a quiet revolution was taking shape above its rooftops. My phone buzzed again, a message from the HOA chairwoman, Judith Pierce. "Final warning. Any unauthorized event will result in immediate legal action." I stared at the words, then typed back simply, "See you tomorrow." I turned off my phone before she could respond. Later that night, I worked alone, wrapping silverware in linen napkins, aligning plates. The city lights flickered in the distance like a field of stars. I caught my reflection in the glass doors, my posture straighter, my face calm. Not the scared girl from last night, but a woman designing her own blueprint for peace. Around midnight, exhaustion hit. My hands were trembling when I tied the last string of lights. I leaned against the railing, watching the mist roll in from the harbor. That was when I noticed the blouse again hanging in the window, behind me, the dark red stain almost glowing under the soft light. I stepped closer, tracing the fabric with my fingertips. The mark was stiff now, dry permanent. But instead of shame, I felt gratitude. It reminded me that transformation always starts with damage. I whispered, "You were the first step." A gust of wind slammed against the railing, cold and relentless. I pulled my jacket tighter and returned to the laptop to finalize the event plan. Safety exits marked. Load capacity documented. Food prep schedule arranged in 30-minute intervals. The engineer in me had taken command. If my father could see me now, he would still call it disobedience. But this was design my own architecture of defiance. When I was done, I exported the file to PDF and printed 3 copies. One for the city, one for my records, and one to hang on the rooftop wall for anyone who needed proof that rules could bend when purpose demanded it. The last task was music. I searched for playlists and found an old recording of acoustic folk songs, the kind my grandfather used to hum when fixing his tools. I played it softly as I cleaned up the scattered boxes. The song that came on first had a line that stopped me. "If you can't find a seat, build your own table." I laughed, startled by the coincidence, and whispered, Grandpa, if that's you, I hear you. I shut down the speakers, the wind carrying the last notes into the night. Standing there, I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of HOA letters, not of my father, not of the silence that used to bind me. Fear had been replaced by motion. Tomorrow they could find me, threaten me, shame me. It wouldn't matter. The table would still stand. Before bed, I wrote a single note and taped it to the refrigerator door. Friday, November 24th, 6:00 p.m. No child's table. Everyone sits together. I read it once, twice, and felt something shift deep inside me like gears aligning. The wind outside had calmed. The lights from the harbor shimmered against the glass. I turned off the last lamp and let the city fade into shadows. Tomorrow would test everything, but tonight, for the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to be seen. I was building something that could never again be taken away. Thanksgiving morning arrived under a gray sky that looked bruised heavy with the promise of rain. The city was quiet, the kind of silence that exists only before a storm or a miracle. I had been awake all night, double-checking wiring, securing tarps, and reviewing the permit again, even though I knew every word. My body moved on caffeine and stubbornness, my mind humming with the tension between exhaustion and purpose. At 6 a.m., the first gust of wind swept across the rooftop, knocking over a stack of napkins. I chased them, laughing softly to myself, the sound strange in the stillness. By 8, the temperature had dropped and my hands ached from the cold. The volunteers were supposed to arrive at 9. By 9:30, no one had come. My phone remained silent. A single message blinked from Carlos, the firefighter. Sorry, HOA contacted my station chief. They threatened to report if I show up. I'm really sorry. Another from Emily. My supervisor said it's not safe. Please don't do this alone. I stared at the screen until my vision blurred. The rooftop that had felt alive last night now looked enormous and empty. Every chair a reminder of how easily people vanish when threatened by power. I set the phone down, trying to steady my breath. You're fine, I whispered. You can do this. I dragged tables into alignment one by one, but my arms shook from fatigue. The heaters flickered as the wind picked up again, whipping strands of my hair into my face. I slipped on the wet deck and caught myself on the railing, the sting shooting through my shoulder. The impact made the bruise on my arm flare with pain from the night of the slap. I wanted to scream, but I bit my lip instead. The taste of metal flooded my mouth. I pressed my palms flat on the table and forced myself to breathe. You wanted your own table, I muttered. Now prove you can stand at it. I went back to work slower now. My fingers felt numb. The clock crept toward noon, the gray clouds thickening overhead. Somewhere in the distance, church bells began to ring hollow and low. I tried to lift one of the food trays, but it slipped crashing onto the deck, spilling vegetables across the boards. The noise echoed like a gunshot. That was the moment my body finally gave up. My knees buckled. I sank to the floor, shaking, chest heaving. The cold seeped through my jeans. I sat there, surrounded by spilled food tables, half-covered chairs, misaligned the city. Moving far below me, as if I didn't exist. My breath came shallow, each inhale scraping my lungs. For the first time since I left that house, I wanted to quit. Not because I couldn't finish, but because I was tired of being the only one still fighting. The tears came before I could stop them. They weren't loud sobs, just quiet drops that mixed with the rain beginning to fall again. I pressed my forehead against my knees and let the world blur. Then a voice behind me said, "That's no way to win a war, kid." I turned. Frank stood by the elevator holding a toolbox in one hand and an umbrella in the other. The rain dotted his worn army jacket, his cap tilted slightly back. "You look like hell," he said. "You should see the other guy," I whispered. He grinned. "That's the spirit." He crossed the deck, his boots thudding against the wet boards, and offered me his hand. I took it. His grip was firm, steady grounding. "They all back out?" he asked. I nodded. Typical. People talk about courage until it requires showing up. He set down the toolbox, opened it, and pulled out a wrench. "Let's get these heaters stable before this wind knocks them over. I fought worse storms in '68. I wiped my face with my sleeve, managed a smile, and followed his lead. For the next hour, we worked together in near silence, the kind that isn't empty but shared. He moved with the patience of someone who had rebuilt things before machines' friendships himself. "You know," he said after a while, tightening a bolt, "my daughter stopped talking to me years ago. Said I was too hard on her." Maybe she was right. I see her in you a little. "You miss her?" I asked. "Every damn day," he said. "But pride's a stubborn disease, hard to cure once it spreads." I looked at him, realizing that pride had been the plague in my house too. Different generation, same poison. We finished securing the heaters just as the rain turned into a drizzle. He straightened slowly, rubbing his back. "You hungry?" he asked. "Not really." "Good. Then help me move these chairs." I laughed. "Yes, sir." The motion warmed me again. With each table we adjusted, the rooftop began to look alive, defiant even. We strung the last set of lights together, golden bulbs glowing dimly against the gray sky. When he plugged in the extension cord, the whole deck lit up. It wasn't perfect, but it was beautiful. The wind calmed as if conceding defeat. Frank leaned on the railing, watching the harbor. "They can't erase you, kid. You're carved in the wind." His words settled deep, anchoring me. "Thank you," I said quietly. He shrugged. "Just doing my part. Every war needs its engineers." "And its soldiers," I added. "And its fools," he said, smiling. "But sometimes they're all the same person." We stood there together, the city stretching out before us, lights beginning to flicker on across the skyline as dusk approached. The chairs gleamed under the bulbs. The tables stood ready. The rain had cleaned everything except the bruise on my cheek, and even that felt lighter now. Frank patted my shoulder. "Go rest, Elena. Tomorrow you'll need strength. They're not done fighting you yet." I looked at him, unsure whether he meant the HOA or something bigger. "I'll be ready," I said. As I turned to leave, he added, "For what it's worth, your old man was wrong. There's plenty of room for women at this table." I smiled, my throat tight. "Then let's make sure they have seats." That night, as I lay in bed, the sound of the rain softened into rhythm. My muscles ached, but my chest felt lighter. The rooftop lights glowed through the blinds like stars that refused to go out. I closed my eyes and whispered to the dark. He couldn't silence me. Not anymore. The morning of the inspection came with a clear sky, the first blue I had seen in days. The rain had washed the city clean, leaving the rooftops shining under the pale November sun. I stood at the edge of the deck, wind tugging at my hair, the smell of salt and iron in the air. The tables were set, the heaters humming softly, and every chair gleamed as if waiting for someone who had never been invited anywhere before. For a few quiet minutes, I let myself believe it was all going to be fine. Then my phone buzzed. "Inspection at 9 a.m., sharp. HOA representatives present the message read. No greeting, no signature, just a warning disguised as formality." I checked my watch. 8:47. I had 13 minutes to breathe before they arrived. Frank was already there, tightening a loose bolt on the railing. He had brought coffee in paper cups, handing one to me. "You look like you haven't slept," he said. "I haven't," I admitted. "Then this'll taste better than it should." We stood side by side, sipping coffee as the city stirred below us. From up here, Charleston looked small and manageable, like a circuit board of quiet lives, unaware of the battle happening above them. The elevator doors opened at precisely 9. Out stepped 3 people, 2 men in city uniforms and 1 woman in a navy suit with a folder clutched under her arm. Judith Pierce, HOA chairwoman. Her heels clicked across the deck like tiny hammers, her expression a mixture of disdain and self-importance. "Ms. Moore," she said, not offering a handshake. "I assume you understand that unauthorized events of this scale violate Section 8.4 of the Community Code." "I do," I said calmly. "That's why I have this." I handed her the printed permit. She flipped through it quickly, eyes narrowing. One of the inspectors, a tall man named Whitman, stepped forward to scan the documents. "Code 14B Humanitarian Relief Classification," he said, glancing at his partner. "That's legal for 72 hours. Judith's lips thinned. "That code is for natural disasters, not dinner parties." "This isn't a dinner party," I said. "It's relief. Just a different kind." She gave a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. You're bending language, Ms. Moore. That's a dangerous habit. I learned it from the people who write the rules, I replied. Frank coughed quietly to hide a laugh. Whitman ignored the exchange, walking the perimeter with a clipboard. Electrical setups, he asked. All grounded, I said. Certified by Charleston Power. Cables rated for outdoor use, extension cords labeled outlets sealed. He tested one of the heaters, nodded, and scribbled something. The second inspector, a younger man, checked the railing and tables. Weight distribution seems fine, he said. Surface stability's good. Judith followed behind them, pointing her pen like a dagger. This event, if allowed, will set a precedent, she muttered. People will think they can turn rooftops into soup kitchens. Maybe they should, Frank said quietly. She ignored him. When the inspectors finished, Whitman signed the report. Everything's compliant. The event may proceed. Judith's jaw clenched. You can't be serious. The paperwork's valid, he said simply. Our job's done. She turned to me, fury flashing beneath her polite mask. You think you've won something I didn't come here to win? I said. I came to make room. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. You have no idea who you're dealing with. This building doesn't tolerate chaos. Then it's time it learns, I said, matching her tone. She stared at me for a long second before turning sharply on her heel. Enjoy your charity stunt, she said over her shoulder. Let's see how long it lasts. The elevator doors closed behind her, leaving only the sound of wind and the faint hum of the heaters. Frank whistled. I've seen generals less terrifying. She's not scary, I said. She's predictable. He chuckled. That's worse. The tension drained slowly from my body, replaced by a shaky sense of triumph. For the first time since I started this, the law was on my side. I leaned against the railing, closing my eyes as the sun warmed my face. Frank handed me another coffee. You handled that like a pro. I learned from the best, I said. My father taught me how to argue with people who think they're untouchable. And how'd that work out for him? We'll find out soon, I said softly. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of preparation. Volunteers trickled back. Carlos showed up in uniform, ignoring the HOA threats, followed by Emily carrying trays of cornbread. Marcus arrived with boxes of donated food and an old Bluetooth speaker. Couldn't stay away, he said. My car broke down, so I figured fate wanted me here. Glad it did, I said, hugging him. By noon, the rooftop buzzed with energy. The long table gleamed, the heaters glowing orange, the skyline glittering like it was holding its breath. Music drifted softly through the air, and for the first time in a long time, laughter echoed where there had once been silence. Frank leaned over to me. You realize what you did, right? Built a table. No, he said. You built a rebellion. I looked around at the volunteers, strangers working side by side, carrying trays, adjusting lights, laughing like family, and felt the truth of his words. This wasn't just a dinner. It was defiance wrapped in grace. Around 2 p.m., a gust of wind lifted one of the napkins, sending it spiraling into the sky. We watched it rise, twisting in the light before disappearing into the sun. Looks like freedom, Frank said. I nodded. It is. When the last detail was finished, I went inside to wash my hands. The mirror caught my reflection. Tired eyes, bruised cheek, fading hair pulled back. I looked older, stronger. The kind of woman my father would never understand. The kind of woman I'd always wanted to be. From the rooftop, I could hear Frank humming an old song, something low and steady, the rhythm of a man who'd survived storms. I smiled and whispered to my reflection, "Let them come. We're ready." Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, scattering gold across the harbor. The tables waited empty but alive, ready for the people who had never been given a seat. The inspection was over. The battle had shifted. Tomorrow would bring the feast, and with it, everything that came after. But for now, the wind was gentle, the city quiet, and the rooftop mine. By the time the sun began to dip behind the harbor, the rooftop glowed like a lantern suspended above Charleston. The heaters burned amber, the string lights shimmered along the railing, and the air smelled of roasted turkey cinnamon pie and the faint salt of the sea. I stood at the center of the deck, my breath visible in the chill. Every seat was filled with people I had never met but somehow already knew. A nurse in scrubs, still marked with faint stains from her shift. A rideshare driver holding a styrofoam cup of cider as if it were gold. A woman from the shelter, eyes wary but softening each time someone smiled at her. Frank moved between them with the calm of an old commander inspecting his troops, except tonight his army was made of kindness. When the first wave of laughter rippled through the tables, it hit me that this was really happening. The HOA had not returned. The inspectors had signed off. The city had turned its gaze elsewhere. Against all odds, we had built something that was both defiance and home. I raised my glass of apple cider, my voice steady but low. To everyone who showed up, I said, and the words carried further than I expected. Conversations quieted, faces turned toward me. Tonight isn't about what we lost. It's about what we're building. No titles, no last names, no hierarchies, just people who decided that no one should eat alone. They clinked glasses and cheered a sound that rose above the hum of the city below. Music started, a soft guitar played by Marcus, who turned out to be better at chords than driving. Emily passed plates down the line. The woman from the shelter, whose name was Maya, laughed for the first time all evening. I watched her and saw a reflection of my younger self, nervous, careful, waiting for someone to prove kindness wasn't a trick. When I sat beside her, she whispered, "No one's ever invited me to Thanksgiving before." I smiled. "Then let's make this the first of many." She hesitated, glancing at the skyline. "You did all this." "We did," I corrected. "It takes more than one person to build a table." She nodded, her eyes glistening. The city lights flickered on one by one, windows glowing like constellations. For the first time in years, I felt connected to something larger than my pain. Carlos stood and made a toast of his own. "To the people who keep things running while everyone else is celebrating," he said. To the tired, the overlooked, and the ones who show up anyway, the applause that followed was thunderous. Even the wind seemed to pause. Frank leaned toward me. "You know what this is, kid, a dinner. A revolution," he said, smiling. The laughter, the clatter of plates, the gentle strumming of Marcus's guitar, it all melted into a single hum of belonging. The rooftop felt alive. The lights swayed in the breeze, the heaters cast halos around faces, and the cold was forgotten. For a while, I didn't think about the house I had left or the man who had thrown me into the rain. I thought only of this, of the warmth that came from people who understood what it meant to be unseen. Toward the edge of the deck stood the empty chair I had carved earlier that morning. A simple wooden seat with one phrase burned into its backrest, "For the unseen daughter." I had carved it with trembling hands, unsure if it was a memorial or a promise. Now, under the glow of the lights, it looked like both. People noticed it as they passed. Some touched it, others just paused to read. No one asked who it was for, and I didn't need to explain. As the night deepened, I moved quietly through the crowd, refilling glasses, adjusting lights, letting snippets of conversation wash over me. Stories of loss, survival, absurdity. Life in all its broken beauty. Carlos told Frank about a rescue gone wrong. Emily shared how she'd slept in her car during the pandemic. Maya confessed that she hadn't spoken to her family in 3 years. "They said I was a burden," she said, looking down. "You're not," I replied. "You were just sitting at the wrong table." Her eyes widened. Then she smiled, small but real. "You sound like someone who's been there." "I built an extra chair," I said. "For all of us who have." She reached out and squeezed my hand. A gust of wind swept across the rooftop, carrying the scent of pie and salt water. Someone started clapping in rhythm to Marcus's music, and others joined in. The rooftop became a pulse of laughter and song. I closed my eyes for a second, memorizing the sound. It was the sound of a wound healing. Around 9, I noticed a limousine pulling up on the street below. Its headlights cut through the mist. For a heartbeat, I froze. The silhouette that emerged was tall, slow-moving, supported by a cane. The doorman helped him out. Even from 10 stories up, I recognized the posture, the quiet authority, the deliberate gait. My grandfather, Henry Moore. I hadn't seen him in nearly 10 years. He looked older, smaller, but the gravity around him was unchanged. Frank followed my gaze. "Friend of yours, family," I said, my throat tightening. The only one who ever told me to keep going. The elevator doors opened and the entire deck seemed to hold its breath. The music softened. Henry stepped out into the golden light, his long coat brushing against the floor, his silver hair neatly combed. For a moment, he simply looked around, his eyes glinting with something between disbelief and pride. "You built this?" he asked. His voice was weaker than I remembered, but still carried the weight of command. I nodded, unable to speak. "Well," he said, smiling faintly, "seems you got my stubbornness." The crowd parted as he walked to the center table. He stopped beside the empty chair, ran his hand over the carved words, and whispered something I couldn't hear. Then he looked at me. "This seat taken?" "It's yours," I said. He sat slowly, every movement deliberate like a ceremony. "Then let's eat," he said, lifting a fork. The crowd laughed softly, tension breaking. Conversation resumed, music picked up again, and warmth returned to the air. Henry turned to me between bites. "You know your father called me last night," he said. My chest tightened. "What did he say?" "He said you disgraced the family, that you embarrassed him." He paused, studying me. "You know what I told him?" I swallowed hard. What I said, he embarrassed himself. The noise around us dimmed for a moment, replaced by the sharp exhale of relief from my lungs. "He never learned that love isn't obedience," Henry continued. "But you did. You took what he broke and built something whole." His hand trembled as he set down his fork. "You make me proud, Elena." My throat burned. For years I had imagined hearing those words, but never like this, not surrounded by strangers who felt more like family than blood ever had. "Thank you," I whispered. He nodded toward the lights. "Keep them bright. People need to see." As the night stretched on, he stayed long after most guests had left, his eyes watching the laughter as if memorizing it. When he finally stood, he leaned on his cane and said quietly, "Your table's bigger than his ever was." He pressed a small, folded handkerchief into my palm. "For later." Then he left, disappearing into the elevator as softly as he had arrived. I looked down at the cloth. My name was embroidered on it, the same handkerchief he'd given me the day I left for MIT. I hadn't seen it in years. It felt like a circle quietly closing. Around me, the last guests began to leave, their faces glowing in the soft light. Maya hugged me before stepping into the elevator. "You'll do this again next year?" she asked. "Every year," I said, "until everyone has a seat." She smiled and whispered, "Then save me one." I stood alone on the rooftop as the last echoes of laughter faded into the night. The heaters hummed softly, the wind gentle, the lights steady. For the first time since childhood, Thanksgiving had meaning. It wasn't about forgiveness. It was about creation. The red stain on the blouse still hung in the window behind me, catching the reflection of the lights. It no longer looked like blood. It looked like a heart. The night had settled into a calm hum, the kind that follows joy when it's too heavy to name. The last of the guests lingered by the railing, sipping cider and watching the harbor lights shimmer on the dark water. I stood near the heater, my jacket open, feeling the warmth seep into my skin. My hands smelled like cinnamon and steel. For a while, I just listened to the laughter, to the faint guitar Marcus still strummed, to the distant church bells marking 10 o'clock. Then I heard it, the low purr of an engine below, smoother, heavier than any of the delivery vans that had come earlier. A limousine, its headlights sliced through the mist curling at the edge of the street. My stomach tightened. For a second, I thought it might be a reporter, or worse, someone from the HOA coming to shut us down after all. But as the door opened and a tall figure stepped out, cane tapping the pavement, I froze. It was my grandfather, Henry Moore. I hadn't seen him in nearly a decade, not since the day I left for MIT. And he pressed a check into my hand, whispering, "Don't tell your father." Back then, he was already fragile, his back bent from age and war. But the man stepping from the limo tonight looked somehow taller, steadier, like the years had sharpened him instead of breaking him. The doorman guided him toward the building entrance, and before I could move, Frank appeared at my side. "You expecting company?" he asked quietly. "Not him," I whispered. "Not tonight." The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and the rooftop fell silent as Henry stepped out. The chatter stopped, the music faded, even the wind seemed to hold its breath. He stood in the doorway for a moment, framed by the golden light, his cane glinting as he surveyed the scene. His eyes, clear gray and impossibly steady, found mine across the crowd. He smiled small and knowing. You built this. His voice was gravel wrapped in velvet. I swallowed hard. Yes, sir. Good, he said, taking another step forward. About time someone in this family did something worth remembering. Laughter rippled through the guests, soft but genuine. He walked slowly toward the table, every movement deliberate, the crowd instinctively parting to make space. Frank moved to help, but Henry waved him off. Still know how to walk, son? When he reached the center of the deck, he paused beside the wooden chair, the one with the words burned into its back. He traced the letters with his fingertips, his expression unreadable. For the unseen daughter, he murmured, That's you, isn't it? I nodded. It used to be. He looked up, his eyes shining. Then who's it for now? Anyone who needs it, I said. He smiled slow and proud. That's my girl. His cane tapped once against the deck before he sat down. Mind if I join the end of the party? It wouldn't be a party without you, I said. Someone brought him a plate, another offered cider. He took both, nodding in thanks. For a few minutes he just ate in silence, watching everyone around him as if committing the scene to memory. Then he said quietly, Your father called me last night. My pulse skipped. Of course he did. He was furious. Henry said cutting his turkey into precise pieces. Said you humiliated him. Said you made him look weak. He looked up. You know what I told him? What, that it takes more strength to feed people than to control them. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He won't understand that. He never will, Henry said simply. But you already do. That's why you scare him. I felt my throat tighten. I wasn't trying to scare anyone. Then you're more dangerous than I thought, he said, smiling. Around us, conversations resumed slowly. The spell had broken, replaced by the quiet murmur of contentment. Frank poured Henry another glass of cider. You did good work here, sir, he said. She did all the heavy lifting. Of course she did, Henry replied. Women always do. The two men shared a laugh that felt like history, unwinding itself, old wounds closing in the space between generations. Henry turned back to me. You've got something special here, Elena. You built what this country forgets, community. I just built a table, I said. Same thing he said. Wars have been fought and ended at tables, families made and broken at them too. You just built one that heals instead of divides. His words hit harder than he knew. For years, every family meal had been a battlefield, but tonight, the table was peace. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded handkerchief, the fabric worn soft from decades of use. My name was stitched into the corner in faded thread. You remember this? I stared at it, my breath catching. You gave it to me when I left home, and you gave it back to your mother when you thought you didn't need any of us anymore. He said gently. She threw it away. I found it. Been carrying it ever since. He placed it in my hand, his fingers cold but steady. Now it's clean again. I looked down. The white fabric gleamed under the string light, spotless except for a faint scent of soap and cedar. You washed it. Figured it was time someone in this family learned how to clean up their mess. I laughed softly, tears threatening. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, he said. You've still got a storm coming. Your father doesn't lose quietly. I'm ready. I know, he said, leaning back in his chair. You always were. For a long time, we just sat there watching the last guests laugh and eat and live freely. The heaters hummed, the city stretched beyond the horizon, and the night felt suspended in amber. When the elevator dinged again, signaling someone else arriving, Henry's eyes flicked toward the door. Told you, he murmured. Storm's here. The door opened and the air changed. I turned and saw them, my father, my mother, and Luke, stepping onto the rooftop like shadows dragged into the light. Henry's expression hardened, but he didn't move. I stood up slowly, my heartbeat steady. The laughter faded, the music stilled. My father's eyes locked on me across the deck, the fury in them sharp enough to cut through glass. So this is where you ran to, he said. His voice carried deep and cold. Building a circus. Henry's cane tapped once against the wood, a warning. Careful, son. My father ignored him, taking another step closer. The guests shifted uneasily, whispering. My mother's face was pale, her lips trembling. Luke stood behind them, expression unreadable. I didn't speak. Not yet. Henry pushed himself up from his chair, his back straighter than I'd seen in years. "Sit down, Richard," he said. "We're about to have a family dinner." My father froze mid-step, stunned that someone had dared to speak to him like that, least of all his own father. The rooftop moments ago, alive with chatter and warmth, had turned to glass. Every sound hung suspended the wind, the faint hum of heaters, even the low thrum of the city below. Henry's voice cut through the silence again, slow and deliberate. "I said sit down, Richard." My father's jaw clenched. "You don't tell me what to do. Not anymore." "Then consider this a request from a dying man," Henry said, steadying himself with his cane. "Sit before you destroy what little decency you have left." My father hesitated, glancing at the watching faces. Strangers, neighbors, volunteers, all silent witnesses to the unraveling of the Moore family legacy. For the first time in his life, he looked unsure. My mother tugged at his sleeve. "Please, Richard. Not here. But pride is a disease that hides as righteousness." He pulled away, pointing at me. "You think this makes you strong," he shouted. "Feeding strangers. Turning our name into a headline." "No," I said quietly. "I think it makes me human." "You're a disgrace," he barked. "You humiliated me in front of family, the church, the entire neighborhood. I built everything you see in that house, and you—" Henry slammed his cane against the floorboards, the crack like thunder. "You built nothing," he roared. The sound silenced even the wind. His voice carried the weight of battlefields of authority no one dared challenge. That house was built by men who fought wars and women who survived them. "You've done neither." My father turned on him. "You were never there for me. You left me to raise myself while you drank and mourned your dead friends. And you grew into something worse than all my regrets," Henry said. "You grew into a coward who mistakes cruelty for strength." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. My father's face flushed red, his fists tightening. "Watch your mouth, old man." "No," Henry said. "I'm done watching." He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded envelope. "This was supposed to be delivered when I passed. But tonight feels right." My father frowned. "What the hell is that?" Henry ignored him and turned toward me. "Elena, your grandmother, and I started a trust fund after the war. We wanted it to go to whoever carried our name with honor. It was meant for your father once, but life has a way of testing bloodlines." He opened the envelope with trembling hands and unfolded a document, his voice steady as he read. "All estate properties and trust holdings under the Moore family name are to be transferred in full to Elena Marie Moore. Any heir who raises a hand against his child forfeits all claims to legacy." The words hit harder than any slap. My father's eyes widened, his anger faltering into disbelief. "You wouldn't." "I already did," Henry said, slipping the paper into the hands of a lawyer who had appeared behind him, a tall man in a dark overcoat briefcase in hand. "This is Brooks," Henry added. "He's been managing the trust for years. Everything's filed notarized and protected under federal law." Brooks nodded. "Effective immediately." My mother covered her mouth. Luke stepped back as if the air had been punched from his lungs. My father's voice cracked. "You can't take everything from me." Henry's expression softened with pity. "No, Richard. You did that yourself." The guests shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to stay or go. Frank moved subtly closer to me, ready if things turned. My father's fury reignited. "You manipulated him," he said, jabbing a finger toward me. "You turned him against his own son." "No," I said. "You did that the night you threw me into the rain." He took a step forward, his face inches from mine. "You think you're better than me? You think anyone here respects you?" His breath smelled of bourbon and bitterness. "They're using you. You're a spectacle." "Maybe," I said softly. "But at least I'm not invisible anymore." The crowd murmured. Cameras from cell phones glimmered as people recorded. My father noticed panic flashing in his eyes. "Put those down!" he shouted, but no one obeyed. Richard Henry said, voice low and final. "You can leave now, or you can stay and learn what real family looks like. Either way, you don't run this table anymore." My father looked around, realizing the power he once wielded through fear had dissolved into air. He turned to my mother. Margaret, we're leaving. But she didn't move. Her hands trembled at her sides, her eyes locked on me. I'm staying, she whispered. You hit her, Richard. You hit our daughter. She provoked me, he snapped. You always defend? Stop. The word came out louder than I expected. Everyone froze. You can't keep blaming everyone else for your choices. You chose violence. You chose silence. You chose to be the man who destroys what he doesn't understand. He glared at me, but his face had changed, less fury, more fear, the kind of fear that comes when the mirror finally reflects truth. Luke stepped forward, his voice shaking. Dad, she's right. My father turned stunned. Not you too. I'm tired, Luke said quietly. Tired of pretending you're right because you're loudest. She didn't disgrace the family. You did. The silence that followed was holy. My father stared at his son, his pride fracturing like glass. Then without another word, he stormed toward the elevator, shoving past the guests. My mother followed a few steps behind, pausing only to touch my arm. I should have stopped him, she whispered. It's not too late to stop yourself, I said. The elevator doors closed behind them with a metallic sigh, leaving the rooftop bathed in warm light and relief. For a long time, no one spoke. Then, Henry exhaled. Well, he said, lowering himself back into the chair that took 50 years too long. Laughter erupted, not mocking, but cathartic, raw, human. Frank clapped his hands once. Now that's what I call Thanksgiving. The tension dissolved into a wave of conversation. Some guests hugged me, others simply nodded with quiet respect. A few wiped tears from their eyes. I turned to Henry, who looked pale but content. You okay? I asked. Better than I've been in years, he said, smiling. Feels good to put ghosts to rest while you're still breathing. He reached out, resting his hand over mine. You didn't just stand up to him, Elena. You stood up for every woman who's ever been told to sit down. I squeezed his hand. He'll hate me forever. Maybe, Henry said, but the rest of us finally see you. The heaters hummed, the wind softened, and somewhere in the distance, fireworks from another celebration flickered faintly against the night sky. Brooks approached quietly, handing me a copy of the document. Everything's official, he said. You're now the legal heir. I stared at the paper, at the ink that carried decades of pain turned into justice. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like release. When the last of the guests began to leave, Frank lingered by the railing, his voice low. You think he'll come back? Maybe, I said, but next time I'll be the one opening the door. I looked down at the city, the lights, the streets, the quiet rhythm of life continuing. Somewhere out there, my father was learning what it meant to lose control. Up here, I was learning what it meant to reclaim it. Henry stood slowly, leaning on his cane. Come on, kid. Let's sit together at this new table of yours. I smiled and joined him. For the first time, it felt like we were on the same side of history. By dawn, the rooftop was silent again. The tables were still set, the lights still glowing faintly, but the air carried a different kind of stillness. The calm that follows a storm that finally breaks. I hadn't slept. Neither had Henry. He'd dozed briefly in the chair with the carved words, for the unseen daughter, while I sat beside him watching the skyline fade from black to pale gold. The city was waking up unaware that something monumental had just shifted above it. My phone buzzed. At first, I ignored it. Then it buzzed again and again. Dozens of notifications poured in, texts, emails, tagged posts. One headline caught my eye, Veteran disowns son for hitting daughter on Thanksgiving. My stomach flipped. A shaky breath left my chest. Frank appeared holding 2 mugs of coffee. You've seen it, he asked. I nodded, showing him the screen. The video was already viral, millions of views. Someone had recorded the confrontation. Henry's voice echoing clear. Whoever raises a hand to his child forfeits his legacy. It played like a sermon. Frank took a sip, smiling faintly. Guess you just made Thanksgiving history. Or infamy, I muttered. Depends who's telling the story. He looked at me, eyes kind. You told the truth. Let the rest take care of itself. By mid-morning, reporters had gathered outside the building. The HOA had released a statement calling the event a disruption to community order which only fanned the flames online. Comments flooded social media, some furious, some awed, all loud. That father should be ashamed. Finally, someone stood up. She's the daughter every silenced woman needed. There were trolls, too, calling it staged, calling me manipulative, calling Henry senile. But their voices were drowned out by thousands more people sharing their own stories of survival, of abuse, of silence. It was overwhelming. Henry woke, blinking against the sunlight. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said. "More like the internet," I replied. I handed him the phone. He adjusted his glasses and read a few comments, chuckling softly. "Looks like the world still cares about right and wrong after all." "Or spectacle," I said. "Maybe both." He nodded. "Justice usually needs an audience." Around noon, Luke arrived looking nervous. His hands were jammed into his pockets, his eyes red. "I just came from Dad's," he said. "He's furious. He's threatening to sue you, Grandpa, everyone." "He won't," Henry said calmly. "He's too proud to walk into a courtroom where he's already lost." Luke exhaled. "He's drinking again." I felt the old ache in my chest, but said nothing. I wanted to say. Luke began voice cracking. "I'm sorry, Elena. I should have stopped him that night. I should have done more." "You did today," I said. "That counts." He shook his head. "Mom's staying at Aunt Carol's. She's scared, but she said you saved her too." I smiled faintly. Maybe we all saved each other. He hesitated, then pulled something from his jacket, a framed photograph. Dad tore it in half last night. I taped it back together. It was the old family picture from when I was 10. The four of us in front of the house, my father's hand heavy on my shoulder, my eyes already wary. The tape lines ran right through his face. I placed it on the table beside Henry's coffee cup. "Let it stay broken," I said. "It's honest that way." That afternoon, a producer from a local news station called asking for an interview. "People want to hear your story," she said. "They're calling it the Table of Justice." I laughed softly at the name, then looked at Henry. He nodded. "Do it," he said. "Not for you, for the ones who can't." So I agreed. The broadcast aired that evening, filmed on the same rooftop where everything had happened. The reporter stood beside me as the city lights shimmered behind us. "Ms. Moore." "Why did you do it?" she asked. I looked straight into the camera. Because silence feeds monsters. Because I was taught to obey, not to speak. And because I decided that if there wasn't room for me at the table, I'd build one myself. The video reached millions overnight. Donations flooded in enough to fund 6 more rooftop dinners across Charleston. Messages poured from across the country. Veterans, teachers, single mothers, nurses. People asking how to host their own table project. The HOA tried to find me again, but the city intervened, citing humanitarian exemption due to public benefit. It was almost poetic. Judith Pierce resigned within a week. Her replacement, a soft-spoken architect, sent a note. "The building is proud to host next year's event." Frank called it divine irony. Henry called it progress. A week later, the governor's office reached out inviting me to speak at a civic forum on community rebuilding. Me, the girl who'd been thrown out into the rain. The night before the event, I found Henry sitting on the rooftop again, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the skyline. "You did it," he said. "You turned pain into structure." "You helped," I said. "I just gave you permission to stop asking for permission," he replied. The air smelled of winter and sea salt. "He hasn't called," I said quietly. "Your father?" "Yes, he will," Henry said. "But not because he's sorry, because he'll need something. When that day comes, you'll know whether you want to answer." "Do you think I should?" He smiled, weary and wise. "Forgiveness isn't a gift for them, kid. It's armor for you. Use it when you're ready." We sat together in silence, the city glowing beneath us like a promise. Somewhere far below, a car alarm blared, a dog barked, life went on. And up here, so did we. I realized then that justice didn't look like revenge. It looked like peace. And peace, once built, could hold the weight of generations. The rooftop was empty now, stripped of the laughter and warmth that had filled it days ago. The tables were gone, the chairs stacked neatly by the elevator, but the air still held echoes of that night, the music, the tears, the defiance. I walked slowly across the deck, my boots scuffing against the wooden planks until I reached the spot where the carved chair had stood. For the unseen daughter. The words were faint now, the wood darkened by weather, but I could still trace the letters with my fingertips. I sat down on the cold floor beside it, pulling my coat tighter around me. The city hummed below, steady, indifferent, alive. My name had been on headlines, my face on screens, my voice replayed across millions of phones. But up here, it was quiet again. I had always thought healing would feel like triumph. It didn't. It felt like breathing without expecting pain. For years, I had lived as though silence was safety, as though endurance was the same as strength. But endurance is what you do when you have no choice. Strength is what you find when you finally decide. You do. My father's words still echoed, sometimes ghosts of old commandments, men build, women follow. I had spent my life trying to prove him wrong, but in doing so, I'd carried him with me, his anger, his standards, his shadow. It took standing up to him losing everything he valued to realize I didn't have to fight him anymore. I just had to stop being built in his image. The wind picked up cold and sharp tugging at my hair. Across the deck, the single blouse I'd hung in the window days ago, the one with the wine-red stain, fluttered like a flag. It had dried stiff, the fabric brittle now, but the color hadn't faded. I walked over, took it gently from its hook, and laid it across my lap. The stain looked different in the winter light, not like blood anymore. More like ink, as if someone had written a story across the fabric and stopped halfway through. I thought of that night, the slap, the silence, the rain. I thought of the girl who drove away with shaking hands and swollen eyes. She had no idea what she was capable of. She thought pain was the whole story. She didn't know it was only the beginning. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out Henry's handkerchief, the same one he'd given me as a child, now freshly washed white as morning. I held it next to the blouse, the clean fabric against the stained one, and the contrast felt like a lesson. "Forgiveness isn't forgetting," I said aloud, my voice echoing against the glass walls. "It's remembering without bleeding." That line had come to me days earlier during a late-night interview when someone asked if I forgave my father. I hadn't known what to say then. Now I did. The truth was, I didn't hate him anymore. Hatred was too heavy, and he didn't deserve to live rent-free in my chest. I had outgrown the version of myself who needed his approval. What I felt now was something quieter, a distant pity maybe, or a sad kind of gratitude. He had shown me exactly what not to become. I folded the blouse, carefully pressed the clean handkerchief on top, and set them both on the chair. A small offering to the woman I used to be. Behind me, the elevator doors opened. I didn't have to turn to know it was Henry. His steps were slower now, deliberate cane tapping against the wood. "I thought you'd be gone by now," he said. "I thought so too," I admitted. He came to stand beside me, looking out over the city. The wind tugged at his coat, the lights below painting soft reflections across his face. "It's strange," he said. "When you're young, you think justice is a destination, but it's really a road. You walk it a bit every day, and sometimes it hurts less." I nodded. "It does hurt less." "Good," he said. He reached into his pocket and took out something small, a folded piece of cloth. "You left this." It was the handkerchief again, but this time it was dry-pressed and tied with a single red ribbon. "You washed it again?" I asked, smiling. "No," he said softly. "This time your mother did." I froze, the words sinking in. "She came to see me," he continued. "Said she's getting help. Said she's proud of you. Said she finally spoke up." I swallowed hard, eyes stinging. She did," he said. "Guess courage runs in the blood after all." I took the handkerchief, fingers trembling, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like that word family was a curse. It was something being rebuilt one truth at a time. Henry smiled, patted my shoulder, and turned to leave. "You keep building, kid. Tables, bridges, whatever the world needs." "I will," I said. After he left, I stayed there a long while. The harbor was calm, the lights endless, the sky bruised purple with the promise of dawn. I thought about every person who had written to me, women who left violent homes, sons who stood up to fathers, daughters who stopped apologizing for surviving. Maybe that was the real inheritance Henry had given me. Not money, not property, but the understanding that legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you repair while you're still here. I stood, brushed the dust from my jeans, and looked one last time at the table where it had all happened. The carved words gleamed faintly in the dawn light. "For the unseen daughter," I whispered, "seen." The city below began to stir again, car horns echoing faintly, life unfolding as it always did. I turned toward the elevator, the handkerchief still in my hand, and smiled. Healing didn't mean the pain was gone. It meant it no longer defined the shape of my days. A year later, Thanksgiving returned quiet and cold, the kind of day that carried memory like a scent in the air. The city was already dressed in holiday lights, store windows reflecting gold and green, but for me, this year was different. The rooftop no longer felt like a rebellion, it felt like home. Where there had once been tension, there was purpose. The long table was rebuilt, this time larger, sturdier, covered in linen the color of sunrise. Around it sat new faces and familiar ones, nurses, teachers, veterans, delivery drivers, single parents, students who had nowhere else to go. They called it the Table Project now. What began as defiance had turned into movement. 6 more rooftops across Charleston were hosting dinners that same evening, each one lit by the same warm glow. News crews filmed quietly from the edges, careful not to intrude, capturing something rare, joy that had learned to survive its bruises. I walked among the guests, greeting them by name, remembering their stories. Maya was back, her hair longer, her laughter louder. She'd found a job at a shelter and now volunteered to coordinate guests. Carlos brought his crew from the fire station, still teasing me about the permit loophole that started it all. Emily had come straight from the hospital, her scrubs hidden under a winter coat. And Frank, dear Frank, sat at the head of the table, a new cap on his head that said, "Table Veteran courtesy of Maya." Henry wasn't there this year. He had passed away peacefully in March, a soft morning when the harbor fog was just lifting. His last words had been simple, "Keep the light on." I did. At the center of the table stood a single empty chair draped in his old army jacket, a small brass plate on it engraved with his name. The wind lifted the collar now and then, as if he were nodding along to the conversation. As the meal began, I stood to speak just as I had a year before. The crowd quieted, forks paused mid-air, faces turned toward me. A year ago, I began this rooftop was just a dream. It started with anger, with loss, with a question. What do you do when your own family turns you away? I thought the answer was revenge. I was wrong. The answer was this. I gestured to the long table glowing under strings of light. Community, connection, courage. My voice steadied. Some of you know my story. Some of you lived it yourselves. You were told to be quiet, to shrink, to endure. But look around you. You made it. You're here. You were never too much. You were never not enough. You were simply waiting for the right table. The crowd clapped softly, some smiling through tears. Frank raised his glass first, then the others followed. The sound of glasses meeting filled the night, delicate and strong. I sat down, exhaling, my heart steady. Across the table, Maya leaned forward. "You think your dad's watching tonight?" she asked gently. I thought about it. I hadn't seen or heard from him since that night. Rumors reached me he'd moved out of the family home, retired early, sold the car he used to polish every Sunday. I didn't know where he lived now, and maybe I didn't need to. "Maybe," I said, "and if he is, I hope he's eating with someone who finally tells him the truth." She smiled. "You think he regrets it?" "Regrets another kind of silence," I said. "He'll have to break his own." The dinner stretched on into the night. Stories rose and fell like waves. People laughed, sang, shared desserts from paper plates. A little boy sat in Henry's empty chair for a while, swinging his legs and pretending to command the room like a general. No one stopped him. When the food was gone and the candles burned low, I walked to the edge of the deck. The city sprawled beneath me, alive with light. In the reflection of the glass door, I saw my own face. Not the frightened girl who had been thrown into the rain, but the woman who had learned how to build warmth from the cold. I thought about the red-stained blouse, now preserved in a shadow box inside my living room. Next to it hung Henry's handkerchief still tied with the red ribbon. The stain and the clean fabric side by side, the before and after of becoming whole. Behind me, Frank approached his footsteps uneven but familiar. "Hell of a year, kid," he said. "You kept your promise." "We all did," I said. "He'd be proud." "He already is," Frank said, tilting his head toward the sky. The clouds had cleared, revealing stars scattered across the black. One of them flared brighter than the rest, faint but steady. Maybe coincidence. Maybe not. "You ever think you'd be here?" he asked. "Not once," I said. "But now I can't imagine being anywhere else." The wind carried the smell of roasted turkey cinnamon and something new, peace. I turned to face the guests again, ready for the closing words. My voice was soft, but it carried. "At Thanksgiving last year, I lost a family built on control," I said. "Tonight, I found one built on kindness. That's what healing looks like, not forgetting where you came from, but choosing where you go next." Cameras flashed, but I didn't care about the headlines anymore. This was for the people who needed it. The unseen, the unheard, the ones waiting for permission to build their own tables. As the night drew to an end, people began to leave, hugging me one by one. "See you next year," they said. Same place, same table. When the last guest was gone, I stayed behind, turning off the heaters, blowing out the candles. The city had gone quiet again, the harbor lights flickering like old memories. I stood in the stillness, the words forming in my mind, the words I knew I'd say to the camera tomorrow when the video went live. If you've ever been silenced at your own family table, tell me where you're watching from. Tell me what you've built to survive. Maybe it's time we stop waiting to be invited and start building new tables together. The call to action wasn't marketing. It was a map away back to belonging. I closed my eyes and whispered Henry's last words to the night. "Keep the light on." The wind answered, lifting the corner of his jacket on the empty chair, and I smiled. The rooftop glowed against the dark, not as rebellion anymore, but as proof that no storm lasts forever.